So I love to speak to historical groups, societies, and commissions because, you in South Lyon here were really lucky because you had a downtown. Novi was just a crossroads. We've always just been a crossroads. So nobody ever stopped in Novi, except my parents and my grandparents. Nobody ever stopped there for anything. You just were passing through to get to South Lyon or to get to Walled Lake or to get out to Lake Chemung or wherever, Nobody ever stopped. But my grandparents owned a gas station and a restaurant on Grand River. And so a lot of the city people that came out from Detroit would stop and we'd pump their gas and sell them corn and worms to go fishing and all that. So I have actually lived in Novi myself 77 years, And just so you know, for historical reasons, I'm the oldest state representative in the state house. I'm the oldest. Yeah, I don't know if that's something great to be proud of or whatever, but I'm there to remind them that, you know what? Novi, you've got to have representatives of all ages and of all walks of life and everything to make good decisions on policy. So I'm serving my last 2-year term, and maybe someday I will retire. I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, because I'm on the Historical Commission, I really got excited to come here tonight because not only how many of you remember the Walled Lake Amusement Park? Anybody ever go to the Walled Lake Casino dancing? Anybody? Yeah, anybody go there roller skating or anything? And when I say, yeah, swimming and all that. Well, my parents would never let us go there because of the riffraff that was there, and that was probably you, because we weren't allowed to go there, us Novi kids, because all the city people came out, and we were very, very skeptical of city people back in the day, in the 50s. We were really skeptical. So I thought, because you're a historical group, I thought I wanted to share a couple of things with you first before I get into the Walled Lake, because I wanted to show you, this is what Novi looked like in the 1800s, right here. It was Novi Road and Grand River. Grand River was the first plank road. And what I mean is they put, they put logs down, and then they would charge you to drive. Now our cemetery, that's just up the road, because this would be the southeast corner right here. Mr. Goodall's store was on the southeast corner. And that was Novi Road. Over there is Novi Road. So the cemetery is just up the way, and because Novi Road was a plank road too, it's to be assumed that our cemetery, that was one of the few cemeteries you could actually get to in a wagon, and because we have in our little Victorian cemetery on Novi Road and Grand River, and I hope sometime you go there, because it's one of the early Victorian parks, because cemeteries were the first parks in America. They really were parks. People would picnic there. They would go there and spend time. And so the access to get to Novi Cemetery was really great. But being on the Historical Commission, we have started to restore our headstones. And if you're interested in history, you learn so much. There is a library of stories in every old headstone that's there. A library of stories. And so we are making it our job, in Novi anyway, to get to the point where you will be able to walk up to a headstone at our cemetery with your smartphone, and you'll be able to tell everything about the person that was buried there. So Mr. Goodall is buried in our cemetery there. And not only that, we thought there were just a few veterans in that cemetery because some of the headstones were actually underground. There's one headstone that's in a tree. It's, the tree grew around it. But these early cemeteries are rolling. They were beautiful. They had maple trees. All the plantings in the cemetery and everything are also historic. So I hope in your cemeteries you're sort of paying attention. We have 3 Revolutionary War patriots buried in our cemetery, a little cemetery on Novi Road. We also have the War of 1812 veterans. We have Civil War veterans, and we have all the way up to World War II. It's just a small cemetery, but every headstone in that that cemetery has a story. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that we learned because somebody actually had burial permits in their house, and they gave them to our historical commission, and we learned some really interesting things. These are the burial permits back in the day, and it sort of tells you when this person died and accidentally. And what we learned was from these burial permits, so many people died of poisoning. And I thought, who was poisoning all these people? But you know what? There was no refrigeration. And if you weren't very good at canning, there's one poor woman here that died of canned peas. It's terrible. Wouldn't you hate for that to be on your epitaph or on your burial permit? And here's Mr. Goodall. You saw him standing by his store back there. There he is. And here's his burial permit right here. Mr. Goodall. He died in 1931. And what's interesting is that the people who went to pick up bodies back then, a lot of times were there's Casterline, I think is the undertaker, but a lot of people there's one of them here, Schrader Brothers. Schrader Brothers were in Northville, and they were a furniture store. But they also, in the early 1900s, they would go get the body, and they would take it to the cemetery, and they were also the coroner. So, and they built the casket, they did all of that. So Mr. Schrader here signed the burial permit on this person here. And this was, she died in 1912, Harriet, and she was hit by a train. You would think back in the day, you could see a train coming, I mean, I don't know how fast it was going, but she was hit by a train. We had several of them. Another one killed by a train. Mr. Ricks, Morris Ricks in 1932. And Olive Johns, food poisoning, canned peas, sad, right? But there were a number of we also had some burial permits that there was a big flu epidemic. And so a lot of people were sort of, were buried in a hurry, all sort of in a mass grave because we had the flu. So your cemeteries, your historical cemeteries can tell you so much about what was going on back in the day. We don't have a lovely little downtown, you've got a little village here, you've got museum space. We don't have any of that in Novi. But what we do have is this historic cemetery, and it tells us a lot about people that lived back in the day. Richardson here died, let's see, Nelson Schrader picked them up too. And look at the handwriting, that's really nice. Hit by an electric car. Wow. That, and here's this poor man, a tree fell on Charles. That's sad. 1907. So there was a lot of things to look out for back in the day. So I hope your historical commission gets a hold of some of these permits and everything, because it tells you. There is one headstone there. It's one of my favorites, my personal favorite, actually. It has all the way in the back of our cemetery, and it has a man's name. And it says husband of, it has the wife's name, father of, the children's name, and then down in the bottom, in big capital letters, it says failure. She got the last word, because really, so be careful, men, if you go first, and if you haven't done a good job, she put it on a big headstone, failure. That was story because we never have a slide of it. I'm afraid to show it because I'm afraid there's some family members that might be in attendance at some place where I am, that'd be sad. But because I think there are probably people with that last name that still live in the area. So I'm a little bit nervous about bringing it up because I'm sure he wasn't wildly popular. But we're here today to talk about the Walled Lake Amusement Park and Casino. So this is our Novi Historical Commission program, and we have another program that I hope you'll invite us out to do also about a world-renowned sculptor that lived in Novi for over 30 years by the name of David Barr. And so we have a PowerPoint presentation on him that you can't believe this guy lived in our area and none of us ever knew him. So Walled Lake Amusement Park, was by Walled Lake, believe it or not. And according to Walled Lake historical information anyway, the first white settlers to Walled Lake was a man by the name of Walter Hewitt. And he arrived in June of 1825 in the Walled Lake area, and he gave Walled Lake its name because he saw a wall in the middle of the lake, and so he built a cabin along the western bank of the Walled Lake. And the Walled Lake Cemetery that currently stands on Pontiac Trail, that's where his cabin was, where the cemetery stands now. So soon after Walter came, there was a lot of people that wanted to come to Michigan, and particularly in this area because the land was very cheap. Some people came because they got a land grant having served in the war. You know, maybe the War of 1812 or maybe the Revolutionary War, and they got a land grant, and they were just looking. A lot of people came here from New York. You'll see a lot of people came from Schenectady and other places like that. So we had a steady flow of settlers that came, and in 1831, a man by the name of Samuel Bassett came to Novi. And if any of you have driven along 12 Mile Road, and you've seen Tollgate Farms, that's on the corner of Taft Road and 12 Mile. Tollgate Farms, which now is owned by MSU, Michigan State University, the farm is still there. That is Mr. Bassett's farm. And he bought a number of acres. He paid $1.25 per acre for his home back in the day. We saw the receipts from it. So in the early 1800s, there was a trading post on Walled Lake. And there were a lot of Indians. There was a large Potawatomi tribe that lived in the area. And in 1833, as many people as they could round up from these tribes were relocated. And they were relocated in many times, like these particular Indians from the Walled Lake area anyway, these Native Americans were relocated to Oklahoma, which was known as the Indian Territory. That's Kansas was another area where they sent the Indians there, the Native Americans there. So we heard, it was rumored for many years, that under the Walled Lake Amusement Park was a cemetery, a Native American burial ground. But we don't know, when they built the amusement park, there wasn't really any, they didn't have to dig down in the ground to do it. Because everything was sort of sat on top of the ground. So we don't really know what was there. And we just don't know if it's rumor, hearsay, or whatever. But many Michigan Indians, and we have heard this before, Connie and I do an annual trip to Petoskey, and there's a large Odawa tribe up there, and the Potawatomi also are related in some way to the Odawas. They told us that when they buried Indians, very often, like up north, they buried them along the water so they could see out to the water. And they buried them standing up, which was kind of different than what we've been told, but that's what the Odawa people told us. So the leaders there in their tribe told us that. So anyway, what's amazing to me is this is a Potawatomi rain dance, and which I think is kind of, and this was in Oklahoma. What I think is kind of funny is a lot of them have umbrellas, so I think they thought the dance was going to be pretty successful, I guess, because they were doing the traditional rain dance, but they had umbrellas. So that was from Kansas, by the way. This is Kansas in 1920, and this was a tribe that had been relocated there. So this is an old map, an old township map, and I hope you have old township maps or old maps too that you can look at. And many of the names here, maybe you in South Lyon wouldn't know, but a lot of the roads and everything are named after some of these people, Decker, and there's also, Austin Drive. There's a lot of people owned a lot of land around the lake, Irwins. There's a number of Flint. There was a big farm, the Flint, the Bassetts. So there's a lot of these names, are familiar to people from our area anyway. So this is the shore drive around Walled Lake, and this would have been in the early 1800s. So this kind of indicates that there were very large homes around Walled Lake. They were like farm homes, and they were around the lake in the 1800s. So there were other peaceful scenes too. Here's a couple peaceful scenes. This is a one-day catch on Walled Lake, if you can believe that. And I know my dad and my grandfather would go fishing at Walled Lake. So a lot of people coming out from Detroit, it was a big deal. If you came out in the 50s from Detroit to Walled Lake, that was like an all-day trip. Of course, you stopped at Gaffney's for buttermilk, and then you stopped for apples, and then by the time you stopped at our place for gas, it was pretty much an all-day thing. So those, it was a long trek. So in the early, most people, I'm sure you don't remember Matt Moran's store. I remember it, but not when this sign was there. This store, Matt Moran's store, was on the corner. It was opposite the Goodall store. And this was the store you would have turned at to head toward Walled Lake. So this was on the northwest corner, where any of you that ever remember Dave's Hamburgers, from Novi, you could smell them 10 miles away, the grease, you could smell all that. So that's the location that I'm talking about right there, Matt Moran's store. So it was a very popular store because he had everything. It was sort of like a general store kind of thing. And most people that traveled out Grand River, when he finally got gas pumps, that's where they stopped. And a lot of people would come out through the rural area of Redford, because Redford then was very rural, and so was Farmington. And then they'd get to Novi, and then they would never stop there for very long, and then they would head to north to one of the lakes or the casinos. We didn't get, until World War I, we didn't get any kind of solid gravel roads. It was after World War I before we actually got any gravel roads. And that was to make it quicker to get to Pontiac or Detroit, or city traffic would drive out on the gravel roads. So you might have stopped here at Matt Moran's store, and Gaffney's Buttermilk was always a popular place. There were a couple, we didn't really have any restaurants. Harnden's store sold ice cream that was right near the downtown area. There wasn't a lot. Actually, we had more sheep then in the 1800s than we had people. We had a lot of sheep. And the old shearing house would have been like 2 or 3 buildings down from that, and it's still standing. And that's where people would go and take their wool, the wool house, that's what it was called. So that's Matt Moran's store again, just to give you an idea. And even Matt Moran started advertising the Walled Lake Park. There were signs up there, and when I was a young girl, we would stand on the corner there on Memorial Day and sell flags for $4. Big, flags to put on the side of your house. We would sell hundreds of flags to all the traffic. Because there was, believe it or not, people think traffic is bad now. But if you had lived anywhere in Novi, Grand River was bumper to bumper traffic every weekend on Fridays, bumper to bumper. And there were accidents because nobody had seat belts. There were always accidents, and my father and grandfather were always scraping people up off the, lots of convertibles, and they were always scraping people up. I don't know where they took them. We didn't have a doctor, so I don't know if my mother patched people up. I'm not sure what happened, but all the way from Farmington to Novi, it was bumper to bumper traffic, and then it was bumper to bumper going up to the lakes, going north to the lakes. So it makes me kind of smile when people say, "Don't you think the traffic is terrible?" Yeah, it's always been terrible, actually. In my lifetime, it's always been terrible, for sure. So Walled Lake had the largest and best known beach in the area, all the way from Detroit. So a lot of people came from Detroit to get out in the country, and they wanted to come to the beach. So it was the biggest public beach and the biggest lake back in the day that people would come to. So the traffic was something. So Walled Lake was advertised in a lot of places. Even some of you that may remember a drive-in movie, this even advertised Walled Lake. Because due to its proximity to Detroit, Walled Lake was a destination of recreation for many years, decades, really. So, in 1917, and let's see if I've got a picture of this guy. I'll show you these people. Where is he? Oh, there. These two brothers right here, they were named the Taylors. Jake and Jake Taylor, he came out here and he built this frame dance hall. Let's get back here and I'll show you. This frame dance hall right here. And in 1922, he built this. And it was a wood frame in the beginning, and that burned to the ground in 1922, so a new frame was built of steel. And there the workers are up there on top, busy working, and of course these three down here standing, watching the workers working. So it was just a frame, like a big dome frame, and so they were completing the steel frame, and they were built both by Jake and Ernest Taylor. So they also had a general store near the south end of the lake, and the dance hall soon after it was up was attracting like 1,000 people would come out to Novi on Walled Lake to dance. So it was attracting a lot of people who came to dance to the Detroit's big bands. So 1922 this started. They also built a bathhouse. Now, if you wanted to go, this doesn't look real attractive, but that's the way it looked, really. You would walk into one of these bathhouses and you were given a basket, and you would go into a changing area and you would take your clothes off, put your bathing suit on, and you would get this little hook thing with a number that was also on the basket number, you know, and then your clothes were there and you could always go back in and get your clothes. So this is the bathhouse. So that's another reason why my parents wouldn't let me go there. There were naked people in there, changing clothes. I don't know what was going on there. But we couldn't go there. We were not allowed. That was riffraff, a darn riffraff. So the Taylors built that bathhouse near the shore, and at the same time, a man and woman by the name of Zenkush were building this Sonaqua Shores subdivision, believe it or not. It was a subdivision. They had a big sign there, and it consisted of 30-foot lots, and you had to buy two. You couldn't buy just one 30-foot lot. You had to buy two, which I thought was kind of unusual, but they thought people then would buy two lots. They could sell them pretty cheap. You're getting two lots, two 30-foot lots along the lake, and it was expected that you would build in the middle. But what people did is they built a 130-foot and they sold the other 30-foot. I don't know how this forward-thinking guy couldn't figure that out, that that's what people did. And that's why we had so many little houses. Back in the day, if you ever drove around the lake, you saw all these little cottages all crunched up together. And that's exactly what happened. They were 30-foot lots, sold in pairs. This was also along the lake. You saw these Willow camp cabins. This is Walled Lake, Michigan. You know, their bathing suits leave something to be desired, but that's what people wore back then. And Willow camp cabins. So you had a lot of those kind of places. And there we go. This is the Taylors again that started it all. So back in the day, there was this toboggan slide also, and I think I've got a better picture of this toboggan slide. Yeah, okay, there's a close-up picture of it. So this was a wooden toboggan slide that the Sonaqua Shores built this, Zenkush. So all of a sudden the Taylors and the Zenkushes were in this competition between who could have the best dance hall, who could have the best stuff on the lake, who could have, the Zenkushes built this toboggan run, and it was there for years. So it was a wooden toboggan, and you got on a wooden sled to slide down this wooden thing into the lake. And so no one ever went home without splinters. There were always splinters. And it was very tall. It was really tall. And so back in the day, then some little girl from Detroit died on this toboggan, and so they tore it down back. Oops, I don't want to go advance. Let me go back here a little bit to give you. This is a picture of Tolatines who also joined this competition, and they had grocery stores, so they got on the act too. But you can see a little bit from that picture. I'm sorry it's so small, but some of the bathing suits back in the day, because the beach, you would not believe how many people were at the beach. And there was a boardwalk all along the beach too. And this wasn't, we're not talking about a lot of acreage here. So the Shores Pavilion, one of them built this great big hall thing, and Zinkush built this big building here, and he constructed this, and it was a dance hall pavilion. And so they were in competition with their dance halls. You can see that car out there. There was one on one side of the road, and there was one on the other side of the road. This is the way Novi Road used to go, and the lake would bend straight ahead. So some of them had restaurant, and they started adding some other things, but this dance hall opened in 1925, and the ceiling was decorated with these beautiful wooden and silk stars, which were hand-painted, and they lit up to give you the effect of the night sky. So it's a little hard to tell from this picture what it was like. But at the same time, the dance hall, you can see, look at the number of people. I actually showed this at Fox Run, and a gentleman that was there said, "There I am." I mean, how he could find himself in there, I have no idea. He said, "No, there I am." I mean, we're looking right at the camera. He said, "There I am." And so I had it blown up for him and sent it to him because he and his wife were celebrating they were on a blind date. So he remembered everything about it distinctly. They were on a blind date. I can't tell you the number of people that have told me, "Oh my gosh, I was at that casino. It was my blind date." You know, and so I don't know how you could tell because there were thousands of people on the dance floor every single night. Guy Lombardo, there were just Glenn Miller, Lawrence Welk, and one of the recordings that we have from somebody, one of the Taylor grandsons anyway, told us that Lawrence Welk was such a religious man, and he came here and played, but then he bought a cottage on the lake so that he and his wife could stay separate from all the other, riffraff, I guess. I don't know what else to call them, riffraff, but gives you some idea. So there was so much competition, but on the beach got to be the most popular thing of all because there were slides and there were teeter-totters, and you would not believe how many people. You couldn't even hardly see the water some days if you went out to the water. My family would let us go to the beach, and I loved the teeter-totter in the water. That was so fun. And the swings, it was all fun. So the water got to be a big attraction, as much as the amusement park. Speedboat rides, these beautiful Chris Craft speedboats, that when you heard the sound of these Chris Craft boats, and you could ride, you walked out on this big, long dock thing here, and for 15 cents, if you paid 15 cents, you can get in one of these big Chris Craft speedboats and just, take a spin around the lake in one of these big speedboats. So everybody, the Zinkushes, the Taylors, and the Toliteens, all were in competition. So as soon as something was added, like a speedboat ride, then somebody else tried to one-up them on whatever it was. So we kept having the benefits of all these new and exciting things. It was, you can see, they even dressed the guys at the dock looked like sailors, which was always made it more exciting, I'm sure. So they put about 8 people in this thing. And, it's amazing when I look at these old pictures, and now I look at Walled Lake today and how different it is when you think about the thousands and thousands of people that would be out there on a weekend. Ford Motor, all the big auto companies would have their picnics there. They would have all their picnics. There'd be tug of wars. They would have games all day long. There would be baseball games, and all that kind of stuff was going on. So it was a picnic wonderland, really. So Fred Pierce, who had designed roller coasters all over the world, decided, you know what? I am finally going to build, the last roller coaster I build is going to be for me. It's going to be my roller coaster. So he built the Flying Dragon. So the Flying Dragon was the roller coaster that's under construction there. So he decided that was what was missing, was the amusement park. So we'd add that to the beach area, you know, in this, on this 12-acre piece of land, you know, we'd add all that. And so he built this roller coaster, and it was all wood. And I can tell you, it was the scariest thing in the world. It was all wood. And when you went up that first hill, I can still in my mind hear that click, 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 click. Because my dad, I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, and my dad, there was no belt you put around you, no. There was this funky little car that you got in, and they pushed a bar back against you, and at one point I was laying on the floor of the car. I was that petrified. And all I did was look up at my father, who was laughing so hard, tears were rolling down his cheeks because I was so petrified. My father loved it when I got scared. So I was so scared that when we got to the end of the ride, my dad says, "You want to go again?" I could not say anything. Nothing came out, and we went again. So I never went on it after that. That was it. That was the end of it. So about the same time, you know, as when Edgewater Park, you know, all of these big amusement parks came into being. So Walled Lake Amusement Park, along with the beach and the casino dance hall and everything, and not the casino word like we know of today where there's gambling and everything. All it was dancing. That was it. So this got to be really popular. There wasn't that much on the property. There was a tilt-a-whirl. There was some little airplane rides. You can see, those are the cars right there. It was like a little box. It was like a little wooden box that you sit in. They look like they're having fun, but I can tell you there was nothing fun about it. Nothing fun about it except for my father. That was the only one that was having fun. So there was a Ferris wheel. There was a House of Mirrors, which I love the House of Mirrors, except that I could never get out of there. But I love the House of Mirrors because you could see, because I was always a heavy kid and I was a heavy adult. So when I went in there, they had a mirror that made you look really, really skinny. And I would stay in that room for like 15, 20 minutes, you know, so that I could see what I would look like if I was really thin. And then I could see what I would look like if I was even fatter than I already was. So it was really kind of fun to see what you would look like, you know, at different times of your life. So that was kind of fun. And you can see everything was wood, and there comes a little train, there it was. And there were these cars down at the bottom. The tilt-a-whirl, there was a guy who took a metal detector around after they tore everything, you know, when they were constructing the new park and everything. He took a metal detector, and he said there was all kinds of change under where the tilt-a-whirl was, lots of change. But the most amazing thing that we found is that in the shooting gallery, which I had been by the shooting gallery, you know, win a stuffed animal, something like that. So by the shooting gallery, there were all these .22 shells. They were using live ammunition at the shooting gallery. I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, today they were .22s. They were real rifles. And so my husband, Hugh, who was also born in Novi, said, well, yeah, we used to have rifle training in the basement of the elementary school. So they would shoot their rifles in the basement of the elementary school. That's where they had their practice. So it wasn't anything unusual, I guess, at the time to have live ammunition in the shooting gallery. It was a shooting gallery, by the way. So, you know, there would be big signs up there. For fun, come to Walled Lake Park. The really weird thing, though, about the park was, look at the people at the Ferris wheel. Can you even imagine the thousands and thousands of people? This would have been in the 1900s, the early 1900s, standing around this crazy little, you can see the lake off in the distance, but standing around this Ferris wheel like it was the most amazing thing ever.
10 cents for adults?
10 cents, yeah. 5 cents for children, yeah. Yeah, you can see the sign down here, yeah. So, there weren't a lot of rides, you know, but people were already there for either the beach or they were there for a picnic or something or other. So they're already on the property, so you couldn't even walk through the property because there were so many people on the property at the time. So eventually, and this will give you kind of an overview of what the park looked like. You would park over there in the parking area, and what's weird is that up in this area right here, right up there, was a bar that's still there. And our police chief, who was our first police chief, Lee Beagle, said it was called the Bucket of Blood Bar. And he said there was a lot of blood in there because he was our police chief at the time the amusement park was there, but he was also our fire chief and our fireman. He was everything. He was it. So he said he went to that Bucket of Blood Bar so many times. There was always trouble there. And so it gives you kind of an overview, but the park opened the day the market crashed. So that was a bit of a problem for the guy who funded it because he didn't have enough money. When the market crashed, his money was in the bank that crashed, and he went to Farmington because he had another account there, and because the market crashed there, he couldn't get his money out of there. So he borrowed money from a rich widow. I don't know what he did for her, but he borrowed money from Mrs. Richardson to help him keep the park, keep it going somehow or other. So it still kept going in times of trouble. So, and of course, everybody was kind of, yes?
Could you give us an idea, like geographically, like what road that is on the right-hand side and so on?
Okay, so this would have been like 13 mile, 14 mile, 14 mile. This would have been Novi Road here. I think that's the way it goes, yeah.
And where's the lake at?
So the lake is over here. Over here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I can tell you that because if I'm wrong, you don't know the difference, right? I mean, I think I'm okay. I think I'm okay. I think I'm all right. So just to show you how far the dock came out into the water, it was very shallow there. It still is very shallow there along the lake. So the speedboats you had to do a long walk to the end of this dock just to get to where the speedboats were. Just to kind of give you, it's a bad picture, I'm sorry. So Guy Lombardo, Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, the Dorsey brothers, and many others played at the Wild Lake Casino. So they were trying to one-up, each other. And so one would add a mirror ball that just reflected everything. One added a big mirror ball. Others put something else in the ceiling. And so they just couldn't compete. So all this rivalry, Zenkush decided he would give away a car at the end of the season. He would give away a car. And you could, if you went there enough times and everything, you might have a chance to win the car. So they kept adding things to the casinos too, so all was going well. But there was some problems with the Oakland County Sheriff's Department because they were dancing on Sundays. That was so evil. So the blue laws would not allow it, and the sheriff shut them down. And Sunday dancing was a big money maker for them. So they had to jump through a lot of hoops and everything in order to get open again on Sundays. And then of course the casino went dark during World War II. So a lot of people didn't go because the men were all off at war and that. So that didn't work so well. That'll give you an idea of the casino pavilion, what it looked like. And so they had an arcade, but they also had an area where you could go roller skating. And sadly, though, this was really terrible. The one casino burned to the ground. All the fire departments, I'm sure South Lyon, everybody came from all over when the casino burned to the ground. It was really a sad day, and nobody wanted to build it back up because what was happening is that the casino, when people in the 50s, when people came back from the war, and everybody was getting more money and they were buying cars and they could go on vacations somewhere else. They weren't going to the parks like Wild Lake Amusement Park. They weren't going to Edgewater as much. So people started going different places because they could. This wasn't the only lake they could go to. They could travel more. We had paved roads so people could go other places. So when this burnt down, they decided, well, we're not going to, it was called, at the very last stage, if any of you know a disc jockey by the name of Lee Allen, he was a disc jockey that really promoted a lot of the dances. Little Stevie Wonder, just before it burned down, little Stevie Wonder, they called it Club A Go-Go. So when it got to be, people were out there doing the swim and the fish or whatever kind of dances they did then. And so it was really, it got to be in the final stages. Very few people, only 100 or so people were coming out. In its heyday though, just before it got to be Club A Go-Go, there were somebody set the record at over 4,000 dancers on a Friday night, a Saturday night, and a Sunday night. Can you believe that? 4,000 people on a dance floor on the lake. So it was really an amazing place.
Mitch Ryder, Fabian,
Yeah.
Deanna Warwick.
Yeah, Deanna Warwick. Yeah, little Stevie Wonder. So a lot of people got to see stars that were just in the early beginnings becoming famous. And I like this new route. Use Grand River Expressway to Novi Road and then go north 1 mile to the park. So Wild Lake Park, the picnic wonderland. The people that own Edgewater tried to keep the park going. So they said, well, we're gonna advertise it as a family park, as a picnic wonderland, and that's what we're gonna do. After the casino burned and everything, they still wanted to keep the amusement park going, but it just wasn't working. And this will give you an idea of where the dance hall was, where the amusement park was, and where the beach was along the road. That fire that I showed you there started in the stage area, and then Novi Fire Department, they called on 6 other communities, so I'm sure South Lyon was probably there too, to try to put the fire out. But there was more than 100 men and more than 20 pieces of equipment that tried to put the fire out. But back in the day, we didn't have fire hydrants and everything. They were trying to pump water out of the lake to put out the fire. But so Club A Go-Go burned to the ground. So the Wagner brothers really tried, they tried to make it a picnic wonderland. And so all those people that you saw and all that activity was going on, this is what it looks like now. It's called the Pavilion Shores Park. It's a passive park. And there are markers out there on stanchions where it tells you what did exist on the property prior to this. There's nice paved walkways, there's bathrooms, there's a stage area there, and now we have one event that'll be coming up there. It's called Pour on the Shore, where all these brewers come out, and you buy a ticket, and it's a big tent and all that. So there've been a lot of activities, and they've added a little playground there in the park, and there's a fishing dock, but it's a passive park now. And I'll show you something. Okay, the fate of empires. I told you about the gentleman that was a world-renowned sculptor that lived in Novi for over 30 years. Well, he put up this sculpture. It wasn't at the park originally. He had it on his property on 9 Mile and Napier. But it's called The Fate of Empires, because he said every empire, the Egyptian Empire, the Roman Empire, they all started out with a framework and they built up. So it started out with a frame, and then it built up to something, it got really big, and then it started its decline. And then at the very end, it fell down. And so we would get so many calls from people saying, someone knocked over that thing. Somebody knocked over it. Nobody knew what it meant, but somebody knocked it over. You need to come back out here and stand that back up. But it was intended to be knocked over because that is the fate of empires. And I thought, well, you know what? What more appropriate property could it be on than that empire that built up and all those people that were on that property for decades, and then it all came to an abrupt halt and it all came to an end. So the interesting thing is we had a designer, an architect, design a bathroom, picnic shelter up there, and so he designed it in a way to look like some of the early bathhouse, one of the early bathhouses. So that's on the property now. And then there's also a wall where the Historical Commission has pictures on the wall. So if you go to the park, and it's a free park, you can go there, and you'll see the pictures, and it kind of tells you a little bit more of the history of that property. But when you look at that property, when you go to see it, You will never believe there were that many people on that property. It just does not seem possible that so many people could have been on that property. Interesting thing, a guy with a metal detector, when the park, Pavilion Shores Park, was being built, he not only found 22 shells, but he found some other interesting things out in the water and on the property. There was this little jug. I have no idea what was in it, but there was a little jug found. And then the bathhouses were, some of them had, it looked like Pewabic pottery, really, on the inside of them. It was beautiful pottery. So there were just pieces of it. Here's the little doofananny that you would put on your basket when you left your clothes in the bathhouse. There were a lot of those in the water. They just have an easy hook there. It'd be easy for them to come off. But this thing was really interesting. This has a telegraph number. This guy must have been very high. He belonged to the Protective Association in Boston, Massachusetts. And you were supposed to call them and give them this number if this badge was found. So no one obviously ever found the badge. And I think we could, I don't know who we'd call right now. I have no idea. But anyway, he was from some protection agency that lost his badge. So maybe he died there. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. But anyway, this is just to give you, this is sort of, there's the grand prize, the card they were giving away on the property. And thrill rides, it says. Yeah, I'll avow for that. I'll say that was a thrill ride. Lots of amusement, lots of thrill rides. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea. I wish we recently got some new pictures. They were adding to the presentation, so sometime, if we come back, I can show you some of the newer, a little bit more. When people knew we were doing the presentation, they would let us scan pictures, so we do have other pictures of the park. So that's just to give you an idea of what was on the property. So, is there? Oh yeah, we've got these brochures that's Novi's Historical Commission, since we don't have a museum, a nice little museum like you have. So there's brochures here. I also have my business card here. So if any of you want to call your government, you can call me up and I'll see what I can do for you. I'll try to, your tax dollars at work here. So see if I can do something for you. So any questions? Yes?
Well, I have a question, but there was a video on public television.
Yes.
And the Oakland County Health Department came out and put green dye in the bathhouse and flushed the toilet, and the beach area turned green.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So
that was part of the demise of the bathing area, the beach area, because we found out at that point, because we had a campground. It was one of the Dodge parks, which is now Lakeshore Park. Everything went into the lake. All of the sewage, and a lot of those cottages around the lake, all of it went into the lake. So when people found that out, and when they flushed the green dye to see how bad it was, the whole lake pretty much turned green. So then they knew that we had a problem. So then they made everybody get put on city sewer system, but that took a lot of years. Yes?
David Barr still lives on Napier Road, 9 Mile.
Yes.
He just opened an art park at his house.
Well, yeah, and that's what I would really love for you all to know a little bit more about him, because he lived in Novi for 30 years and we really didn't know much about him. Just a few people knew about him. He built his own house all by himself. He built his own house. Unfortunately, he died a couple years ago, but the city, he let the city buy his property for a reduced rate as long as it would become an artist in residence park. So it has been an artist in residence park ever since it opened, and we have artists there, and if you are an artist that wants to reside there, you have to apply, and then you have to leave a work there. But you would not believe, and I'm not a fan of modern art, I guess I don't really understand it, but if you have been downtown Detroit, and downtown on the, along the river there, what's the park there? Well, not Riverwalk, but right downtown at the end of Woodward. Oh boy, it'll come to me tomorrow and I'll remember. But anyway, there's a big, huge sculpture, a gigantic, like 2 arcs, two arcs that come together like this. Transcending is the name of it. He did that. He was a person that actually did that. He also did a number, there's over 21 or 22 sculptures on his property. Now it's known as an art park. I think it's probably Michigan's only art park run by a Parks and Recreation department. So we've made it a park, and you can go there, but David's work has a story behind it. So everything that he did, even though it's modern art, it has a wonderful story behind it. And there's several things that he's done there on the property that he was a genius. Really, he was not only a teacher, he was a professor, but he was also an engineer. He was a mathematician. He was just a lot of things. So I would love for you to not only go to the property and see some of those gigantic sculptures. You can't imagine how one person could do something so huge with it. It takes cranes to actually put it all together. It's amazing. It's really amazing. So you know what? I mean, one of the questions that we had to deal with as a historic commission is, what's historic? What do you consider historic in your community? It could be something that's not really, really old. You know, I mean, what do you think of as historic? You know, anybody got any ideas? Something that's been in town for a long time? Something that, you know, I mean, it's hard to decide, because this house, David Barr's house, actually has only been in existence for about 30 years. So, is it historic? Does something have to be old to be historic? But because of his world renown, he built the world's largest sculpture. And I know it's kind of hard to explain, but if you were to put a tetrahedron inside the globe, so it's like a triangle, if you were to put that inside the globe, he went to those places. One was Easter Island, one was somewhere. He went to those places and he built a sculpture at those places. And it's the world's only largest sculpture. He did a lot of work that was like on one side of the United States looking over at Russia, and you know, with hands and doves. And I mean, it's interesting to hear the stories about it. I have a new appreciation for modern art, especially because in an artist's eyes, there's a message, it tells a story. So it's not the Wallach Amusement Park, because that's historic too. But
this is just open and you can walk around?
you can walk around, you can go there, and there will be, in August, there will be docents on certain dates that will be at the park that can help. But there's also little messages at each one of the sculptures that's there. And I'll tell you about one of my favorite things that's there. There's this gigantic thing, and you can see it from the road. It's huge, and it's brightly colored, and it looks like a dragon. It looks like a dragon. But actually, it's called Isaiah. And David Barr was a real sports fan, especially basketball. And so he had watched Isaiah Thomas, and he watched him and how a basketball, you know, the distance of the basketball and the circumference of the basketball is the exact distance between each one of the sections. And then it goes up and it goes in the basket. So it looks like a dragon, but there's a story behind it. It's sort of his recognition of how a basketball moves, and how Isaiah Thomas, who we thought was really the best, how it all works. So when you first look at it, though, you think, oh, wow, yeah, that's a dragon. No, but then when you read into it, and another piece that's there, I'm spoiling it for you, but I have to tell you this, that I just thought was old rusty parts. In fact, Parks and Rec, when they acquired the park, said, what are we going to do to clean that up? Well, it's not supposed to be cleaned up. It's a work of art. It looks like a grill, like you would find in a park. It looks like a grill. But inside the grill is a piece of, it's marble, white marble, that has words in it, like Russian or something. And there's bars on the top like you would have in a grill. But the story was, he was intrigued by the story of a poet, a Russian poet, woman, who was put in a gulag, in a prison in Russia, for writing poetry. They didn't like the poetry that she wrote. So they put her in prison. And what she did was, in order to keep her poetry alive, she wrote it in a bar of soap. And when the guards would come, she would erase it. And that was how she remembered her poetry, because she wrote it. So what you see in that thing is like the bars and the rust and everything is representative of the Russian Gulag prison. And the marble and the soap is just like she wrote her poetry, because he thought her existence was so remarkable that she, against all odds, she kept her dream going, you know. So I don't know. I mean, that's just another thing that that we're doing. So I really hope you come out there, or else have me come back and do a presentation on the David Barr story.
When you think of Hart Plaza?
Hart Plaza, thank you. I was going to remember it tomorrow. I was going to remember Hart Plaza tomorrow. That was my plan. Yeah, right in Hart Plaza, right downtown. And if you go to Bishop Airport, you see some big, huge sculptures at Bishop Airport in Flint. He did those. Outside the Historical Museum in Lansing, a huge sculpture outside there is a work of his as well. And he also, if you've ever been up to Crystal Mountain, which is near Thompsonville, in you know, up here somewhere. He started the Michigan Legacy Art Park up there, and it's there's condos along there, and there's a golf course there, but in between there's acres of just sculptures, and there's many of his sculptures there, but there's also a place, because he believed that that nature tells us so much. You know, nature is really, he loved to see sculptures sort of tucked away in nature in places. So in the woods there, and walking through the woods, and there's a trail, you can go along and see all the different sculptures that are up there. It's amazing. It's truly amazing, you know. So I'm a real cheerleader for David Barr's work now, you know, and I would have never thought that, really, because I like to see things that I understand. I want to understand it when I look at it. So I didn't understand his work, and I didn't fully appreciate it. But when you hear the stories about it, it gives you a different appreciation. And the massive, you know how massive the sculptures are. I mean, it's truly remarkable. And the fact that he built his own house, he was really a funny guy. He had a great sense of humor. And when everybody said, "You're going to build this house yourself," he didn't even have a ladder when he decided he was going to build a house. Didn't even have a ladder. So he would like use masking tape or duct tape and tape chairs together so he could stand up to put another, you know, block up there. And he said he really underestimated Novi in its planning, because he just thought you can just build your own house, you can dig your own hole, you can do whatever. And he said he found out the planning process was a little bit different. You know, somebody was going to show up to inspect your work, which was kind of a surprise to him. And there was a necessity to get certain things done at certain times. So our historical commission, he gave his book about his home to the Novi Historical Commission, and we have his book that we can sell, you know, that we can keep our programs and things going. So anyway, yeah, come on. So anytime we have a program.
I have
Yeah.
question.
Yes.
There are those restaurants that are on Wall Lake now. Okay, in relation to them, where is this Pavilion Park?
Which restaurants?
Well, you know, I don't know, they changed the name.
Are you, okay, you're thinking of downtown Walled Lake.
Right.
Yeah, this is at the opposite end of the lake.
Okay,
So Pavilion Shore Park, if you were to go past 12 Oaks Mall
okay.
and you went straight ahead to the lake, that's where Pavilion Shore is.
So if you go down Novi Road,
Yeah.
past 12 Oaks Mall, there's like 12, they call it 12 and a half miles.
Right.
But it's really not, they call it that.
Yeah.
But if you turn into there, you run right into
Yeah.
the Pavilion Park,
And it's-
Commissioner Phil Wiper just showed up.
which is where.
You missed the whole thing, Phil. You missed it all.
Ryan posted it on Facebook and I watched it.
Ah, really? Oh my gosh, that's what brought you out, right? So yeah, it's right at the very end of Novi Road.
It's actually in the city of Novi.
Yeah. Most of Walled Lake, believe it or not, is in Novi. The vast majority of the lake is really in Novi.
14 miles to the border, so the amusement park was between 12 and a half and
Yeah, so our mayor really has a problem with all the things that are actually in Novi, but we call them something else, like Detroit Catholic Central is in Novi. You know, the Detroit Japanese School is in Novi. The Walled Lake is in Novi. So, I mean, he gets all mad about it. He wants everybody to change their name and call it Novi anyway. So I don't think Catholic Central is going to change their name. Yes?
How did Novi get the property then? Because it sounds like this was all private owners that owned it and they set up their pavilion.
Well,
how does Novi get into the picture?
Well, there were a lot of plans. There were some plans for a boardwalk along there, and there was going to be a restaurant. But a lot of the plans, the people never came up with the money to actually do it. So it ended up, we got it and we made it a conservancy. The property became a conservancy. And then it was called the Pavilion Shores Conservancy. And then we had an architect design a passive park, because that's really what, we listened to people. You know, people gave us ideas of what they thought should be there and what it should be called and all that. So we listened to what they had to say, and they wanted a passive park. They wanted someplace where people could go and just look at the water, where there wouldn't be people swimming, there wouldn't be boats, it could just be something where you could sort of decompress. And that's what the vast majority of the public wanted there. So, yes.
I was going to ask you that, since it's like a passive park, so nothing really commercial is on it?
No.
So it's completely the way it was before, the property?
Right.
Except that, you know, it's not the amusement park.
Right, yeah.
And I also heard Chuck Berry was there too.
Oh yeah, Chuck Berry was there. I mean, Chuck Berry was there. I think, isn't he the one that was in prison?
Yes.
Yeah, he came the day after he got out of prison. Somebody picked him up and brought him to Novi. Amazing, yeah. Yeah, he got right out of prison, yes.
Somebody I heard the other day said there was some kind of tunnel during the amusement park.
There actually is a tunnel further down at Lakeshore Park that you go under the road to go over to the beach. That's where there's a tunnel. But there's no tunnel at the amusement park. They never actually dug down even.
Assuming when Novi Road actually went all the way to there.
Yeah.
Would that have been that way off where the neighborhoods were at? You know, there's that little small bridge. When you used to be able to drive all the way around the lake.
Yeah, right.
And you'd go where this was at.
You would come to the end where the property was, and you'd go this way to the lake or that way to the lake where all the residences were.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was just trying to place
The
that.
tunnel is to the left or
Yeah.
west of where all those residents.
Oh.
And it's city-owned property. It's a beach. Now it's closed actually now because they're doing a renovation and putting in a new public community center there. So it's still a beach, you know, and Parks and Rec operates it, and we have lifeguards there and that kind of thing. But we've also we've got soccer fields and a motocross course, and there's all kinds of things back there on that lakeshore property that actually used to be one of the first campgrounds in Oakland County called Dodge Park. There were a number of Dodge Parks where you could go and you could camp for the weekend, and that was right at Lakeshore Park. And
And the other thing
yeah.
to think about, especially in the 50s when you had Chuck Berry and Little Stevie Wonder and all the big bands in the 50s, and that was all the dancing after the big band era. But really, not only with the fire in the early 60s, but whether it be Edgewater Park or Wall Lake Park, it really started to all go away because, you know, we had television, think about television.
yeah, as soon as
And
television got to be a
air
big deal.
bandstand, so you didn't have to go and then all the stars.
Plus, in that same recording that you talked about, they talked about the fact that the owners of the dance hall too found out that, you know, you're putting up a lot of, when you bring in like Guy Lombardo, or you bring in, you know, they said Guy Lombardo was a big draw. But if you bring in those big bands like Glenn Miller, you've got to house all these people, and a lot of the little cottages around the lake would house these people, and they'd be there playing for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and a lot of people made money renting out space, their beds to these people. But as soon as they found out, wow, you know, if we just have one singer like Guy Lombardo, we only have to put up one person, you know, and he's a big draw, and we don't have to take care of all these band members. So That was part of the thing that started happening. Then they started getting individual entertainment more than they got anything. So, you know, and then it got to be just a younger crowd, and it was a very different crowd. You know, people just didn't do the big band dance anymore, and there's been a little bit of a revival of that. So, yeah. Yes?
Did they ever figure out what the wall part in the lake was? Or who did it?
You know, it is all kind of, it's still kind of hearsay, once again, because some people say, well, yeah, I saw a wall there, but what isn't known is that a wall of rocks that were left when the glaciers came through, or was it actually like a fish, what do you call that? You know, where the Indians built up an area that would catch the fish and they would be sort of captured in that area.
See, I always heard the story that there was actually two different lakes. And that
Two different lakes. There's a mud lake.
There was two
across the
different lakes, and Walled Lake was actually two lakes.
Yeah.
And there was a wall that there was some kind of property line between those two lakes. I think American Indian or something. But there's all kinds of stories.
There's a lot of stories. There's a lot of stories about how Novi got its name. Yeah, and that's what Maggie was asking me about, how Novi got its name. Because she heard it was number 6 on the toll road between Detroit and, you know, between Detroit and Novi, it was number 6 toll road. But actually it was never number 6. You know, and there's lots of stories. I always told the story, which I think could be true, that there was a bar called the Novi Inn, because there was a bank, actually the building is still standing, on the southeast corner. There's a building right on the corner, we're almost right up to the road, that was scheduled to open as a bank the week the market crashed. It was going to open as a bank, so it became a bar instead, called the Novi Inn. So a lot of people, the locals especially, knew the Novi Inn. And they had an upstairs where people, just like, you know, at the old hotel, there was an upstairs where people would sleep, you know, and there was a barmaid named Vi, and she was so ugly that people would go, no, Vi, when she tried to get them to go upstairs, and they would go, no, no, Vi, no, no. And so it kind of caught on, caught on, yeah, it did. And so people thought, well, is this place called Novi? Maybe that's what it is. You know, so there have been a lot of stories like that. But the truth of it is, when we look back on the old minutes and everything, the farmers used to have, a lot of the farmers, local farmers, the people that owned sheep and everything, really were illiterate. They hadn't gone to school, and they couldn't write. You know, we were called West Farmington for a long time. Novi was called West Farmington. And people couldn't write that. Some of the early people couldn't write it. So if they were ordering things, like we got our chickens through, they came to the feed store, they came on a train every year. You know, our feed and everything came on the train. But you had to be able to write who your name, you know, you write your name. So some doctor's wife, and it's presumed that probably she was more educated, had a township meeting in the 1800s, and they said, we need a shorter name. We can't call it, it was called the Four Corners at the time. It's called the Four Corners, Novi Road and Grand River. And they said, we need something short that the farmers can learn to write. And so the doctor's wife suggested Novi. And it's presumed because in Europe, there's a lot of places called Novi. There's towns called Novi. And it sort of means new, or, you know, something like that, new. And so she suggested Novi, and they thought, well, that's a dumb name. I mean, why would we call it that? But then after a bunch of arguing and debating and everything, they said, well, okay, they can learn to write Novi. And that's what it was. It was never the 6th stop on the toll road. But everybody wants to tell me, everywhere I go, I know how Novi got its name. It was the 6th stop on the railroad. Actually, the railroad, we had the name before the railroad even came. So, I mean, no. It wasn't the 6th stop, and it wasn't the 6th toll road. So I hate to burst your bubble. Just remember the ugly barmaid named Vi, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Any other questions? Well, thanks so much for coming. Yes?
What was the last year that Walled Lake Park was open?
1965, I think it was, 65 or 66. They just started tearing it down and took it down piece by piece, and you know, that was it.
I moved in the area in '68, and there was still
some remnants of it. Took them a long time to take it
Yeah.
all down. Yeah, it took a long time.
And for those of you in the Detroit, remember the old Edgewater Park, the Cafe 7 and the Telegraph?
Yeah.
They owned, so they tried to keep them.
Yeah,
open, but-
I would give anything if our historical commission at least had one of those horses from the merry-go-round or something or other. That would have been awesome. But, you know, back then we just didn't think anything about it. You know, we didn't appreciate what we had. So we don't know what happened to them. I would imagine they got sold to, you know, merry-go-round went with all the horses and everything to the other park. Yes?
In Cleveland, where we're from originally, they had a Euclid Beach, and that was kind of similar to Walls Lake Park.
So it was like a amusement park where you'd go.
Yeah, on the water.
Did they use live ammunition
Well,
in their shooting gallery?
but they had like a laughing lady, you know.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But they had the roller coasters that kind of remind, they had something called the rotor, which you would stand up in the centrifugal.
Oh, yes, yes. Edgewater Park had that
And, you
too.
know, and it was really, you know, kind of reminded me of the same type of thing.
Yeah. Well, you know, the parks are all good. Now we have Cedar Point, you know, and now they're trying to one-up each other, you know, who can have the biggest, wildest roller coaster. So thanks so much for coming. I appreciate your kind attention, your great questions, so thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Yes.